Bona tarda a tothom. Good afternoon. Molt benvinguts en aquesta primera de les 3 taules que hi haurà a continuació. Voldria, abans de començar, agrair a Sobirania i Justícia i molt especialment a l'Isabel Helena Martí que m'hagin convidat i hagi pogut tenir l'oportunitat de participar en aquest debat altament interessant. Ho puc dir perquè ja hi he estat aquest matí i ha sigut molt interessant i espero que amb les 3 taules d'aquesta tarda acabem d'aclarir coses o com a mínim ens donin peu per la reflexió que em sembla que la necessitem. Començaré molt breument en anglès perquè vull que ells m'entenguin bé. Ja sé que tenen traducció però voldria que m'entenguessin, després continuaré en català. Twice in 1 year, from September 2012 to September 2013, more than 1.5 million of people have taken the Barcelona streets and the Catalan roads to demand independence. And that after 300 years trying to dialogue and to build bridges with Spain, with the Spanish state. And I underline that. After something happened? No? Okay. Please be. Everything is fine. After 300 years of trying to dialogue and trying to build, even to build a new kind of a state, kind of a state who can understand the diversity. And we feel tired of that, because 300 years trying to dialogue are a lot of years. And at the other side of this dialogue, of this kind of thing, what we have found, kind of autism. They don't listen. And I would like to, just for the reason that I speak in English now, I would like to mention one poem. Everybody knows the poem, Ode to Spain, written for one of our best poets, Joan Maragall, in 1898, after years of this intent to dialogue. The poem starts, "Listen, Spain, the voice of a son who speaks to you, not in Castilian." I'm not going to read the poem, it's a long poem, and inside the poem there is a lot of examples of this intent to dialogue. And at the end, and the essential thing is that the Spain is not listening, doesn't listen. So at the end he says, "Where are you, Spain? I search you in vain. Cannot you no longer understand your children? Then farewell, Spain." So these words are written in 1898. After that, we have keep trying to dialogue and trying to build another kind of state. It has been impossible. Once again, the Spanish Prime Minister and his government have refused to open a dialogue on the issue. In contrast to David Cameron's cooperation concerning the movement to Scottish independence and granting to the Scottish Parliament the right to hold a legal referendum on independence. It's true, we are in front of different democratic cultures, but also in front of different possible results. Maybe that is one issue. In Catalonia, the last polls show that the 75% of the population supports the referendum. It doesn't mean that it's going to vote yes, but supports the referendum, supports the possibility to vote. The 54% are for independence now. The 21% are against independence. They are going to vote no, and the 25% are still undecided. D'entrada, doncs, no estem parlant només de la legalitat de la independència, sinó del dret democràtic i pacífic a convocar una consulta per conèixer la voluntat d'un poble. Estem parlant del dret de votar. It doesn't work?
Perfect.
And now you understand Catalan?
Yes, it says no dialogue and it's time to separate.
Okay. Well, Jo no soc ningú per parlar. It's crazy, but you have been with earphones in English and now in Catalan. I'm very happy, really. Bé, jo no soc ningú per parlar dels aspectes legals, ni tampoc crec que aquest sigui el meu paper, però conec perfectament la Declaració Universal dels Drets de l'Home de l'any 1954, abans en estàvem parlant amb el professor Fassbender, que en el seu article 5è reconeix el dret de l'autodeterminació, o del Pacte Internacional dels Drets Civils i Polítics, adoptat per l'Assemblea General de les Nacions Unides el 66 i que em sembla que va entrar en vigor 10 anys després, l'any 76, que també recull aquest dret. A nivell de jurisprudència, com ens recorda en una entrevista fantàstica en una web amb Independència, ens recorda el jutge Santiago Vidal, que no sé si és entre nosaltres, algú m'havia dit que era per aquí, no el veig. Tenim dues sentències, una del Tribunal Constitucional del Canadà de l'any 1998 i una altra del Tribunal Internacional de Justícia del 2010, que també reconeixen el dret a l'autodeterminació, però també, com diu molt bé Santiago Vidal, és veritat que la Unió Europea no l'ha reconegut explícitament, però tampoc l'ha prohibit. Tornem un segon només al Canadà, perquè em sembla que és important per al tipus de debat que tindrem després, que va sobre el reconeixement, el possible reconeixement o no d'un nou estat. En aquesta sentència, la pregunta del govern federal sobre si la Constitució canadenca emparava la declaració unilateral de la independència, el Tribunal Constitucional o Cort Suprema, ara no me'n recordo quin és exactament el nom, del Canadà va respondre que malgrat tractar-se d'un procediment no estipulat per la legalitat constitucional, seria legítim si fos el resultat d'una expressió democràtica majoritària i seria viable si el nou estat fos reconegut per a la comunitat internacional. I aquí estem, en aquesta sessió va d'això, o sigui, va de la legitimitat, però sobretot va del reconeixement, va de la legitimitat però també de la viabilitat, perquè a vegades un pot tenir tota la legitimitat però pot no ser viable o pot trobar impediments en aquesta qüestió. Per tant, estem aquí per discutir això i per això hem demanat a dues persones de gran prestigi. No hem anat a buscar persones que ens diguessin que sí a tots els nostres arguments, no hem anat a buscar persones que ens donessin suport a tots, sinó que hem anat a buscar persones que realment des del punt de vista del dret ens marquessin escenaris des del pitjor al menys dolent o al millor el que podria ser un reconeixement d'un nou estat. El professor Talmon parlarà sobretot dels escenaris davant de la comunitat internacional i el professor Fassbender parlarà sobretot del reconeixement, un possible reconeixement davant de la Unió Europea. El doctor ja els hi donaré la paraula perquè són ells els que han de parlar, no tant jo. La dinàmica de la taula serà que ells parlaran uns 20-25 minuts cadascú i que després obrirem un debat entre nosaltres, una petita discussió entre nosaltres per clarificar les coses que no hagin pogut quedar suficientment clares. Els vaig a presentar. El doctor Stefan Talmon és especialista de dret públic, de dret internacional públic i de dret europeu. És codirector de l'Institut de Dret Internacional Públic de la Universitat de Bonn. És també Supernumerary Fellow del St. Anne's College d'Oxford. És scholar de la Fundació Adenauer i de la German National Scholarship Foundation. Sorry, I say that in English because in German for me is quite difficult, you know.
And I perfectly understand that.
Yes, okay. És guanyador de nombrosos premis per la seva tasca acadèmica i ho veuran vostès amb la seva exposició per l'originalitat i qualitat de la seva recerca. Ha exercit de jutge, representa i assessora clients públics i privats en tribunals locals i internacionals i ha publicat diversos llibres i articles sobre el reconeixement de governs i estats en el dret internacional. Al seu costat, el professor Bardo Fassbender és professor de dret internacional, de dret europeu i de dret públic a la Universitat Suïssa de Gallen. Va ser professor de dret públic i de dret internacional, de dret europeu i d'història constitucional a la Humboldt Universitat de Berlín, on es va doctorar i habilitar. va ser fellow de la Ford Foundation a Yale i fellow Jean Monnet a l'Institut Universitari Europeu de Florència. Ha sigut assessor del Consell Legal i del subsecretari general de les Nacions Unides i és especialista en dret internacional públic, dret de les Nacions Unides, dret constitucional comparat i en història del dret internacional i del dret constitucional. És autor de diversos llibres, entre els quals El Consell de les Nacions Unides i El dret de veto, una perspectiva internacional, o també de la Carta de les Nacions Unides com a Constitució de la Comunitat Internacional. Per tant, comencem. Dr. Talmon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank Sovereignty and Justice for inviting me to Barcelona. This is my first time to Barcelona. It's also my first time to Spain. I don't know whether this has anything to say that I'm first coming to Barcelona before I'm going to any other part of Spain. But I seem to have a very long-standing relationship with Catalonia. As I said this morning, in 1982, I was a Boy Scout and I attended a scout camp in Kandersteg in Switzerland. And there I met Boy Scouts from Catalonia who handed out free stickers. And one of these stickers said, "Freedom for Catalonia." And for about 10 years I was running around with a sticker saying "Freedom for Catalonia." So only when I basically ended my career as a Boy Scout, I also ended my relationship with Catalonia. So I'm very happy to reconnect to Catalonia and the idea of freedom for Catalonia. So perhaps if I could make one suggestion to the organizers, it would be great to have some stickers to take home with, and we would spread the good news in other parts of the world that Catalonia needs some freedom. Now, I have been asked to talk about the international recognition of new states this afternoon, and this is probably one of the most complicated subject areas of international law. Of course, every international lawyer will tell you that his or her subject is the most complicated subject area of international law. But of course, in this case, it is true. Recognition really is the most complicated area, and I have good counsel on this. One of the most famous international lawyers of the 20th century actually said so. So I plagiarize what he said, because he said international law is one of the most complicated areas of international law because international law and politics are closely intertwined. So recognition is not just a question about law, it is equally a question about politics, as you will realize in my presentation. Now, I feel a little bit uncomfortable because I have been asked to talk about recognition of new states. But of course, so far, we do not yet have a new state. So I'm looking somewhat in the future. I'm dealing with things that still might happen. So just for clarification, international law, and especially recognition in international law, has nothing to say, for example, about whether you can hold or whether you should hold a referendum. So recognition doesn't deal with the question of referenda. Recognition deals with the outcome of a referenda. So recognition only becomes relevant once a decision has been taken. It is silent on the way to the decision that is to be taken. Now, imagine the process that leads to the decision has come to an end, and we will have a new state. In this case, we might face three different scenarios in which recognition may play a role. The most bleak scenario, of course, is that Spain never agreed to a referendum. A referendum is held in opposition to Spain, and Spain also opposes independence of Catalonia, and a unilateral declaration of independence is made. This is really the case for recognition, where one side unilaterally decides to split from an existing state. In this case, recognition for the new state is of prime importance. In this case, it is relevant whether you get recognitions within the first 24 hours, how many recognitions you might achieve within the first couple of days, how many recognitions are forthcoming within the first months. Because in such a situation, recognitions will help you to stabilize this new political entity, this new state. It will give stability, it will give legitimacy, and it might prevent the so-called parent state, in this case Spain, from doing something you might regret afterwards, like sending in the troops to quell the unilateral declaration of independence. Now, this is really the question of recognition, a unilateral declaration in opposition to the parent state. That's what I want to talk a little bit later on. Just for the sake of completeness. On the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, there is, of course, a separation on agreed terms. You may agree on a referendum. Spain says, yes, if enough people in Catalonia vote for independence, then we will negotiate on how you can achieve that independence, and at the end of the process, you will declare independence. This is, for example, a scenario we have seen recently in the case of South Sudan. A couple of years ago, we have seen this in the case of Eritrea. So South Sudan was splitting from Sudan, and both sides were in agreement that this is all right. Similarly, when Eritrea split from Ethiopia, both sides were in agreement. In this case, recognition really is no issue at all. Within 24, 48 hours, the new state will be admitted to the United Nations. You will receive telegrams from President Barack Obama of the United States or other world leaders who will write to the leader of Catalonia and will say, welcome to the club and congratulations on achieving independence. We hope to work well together in the future. In this case, there is no problem about recognition. People will not even use the word recognition. Recognition will happen by implication, as it is said. So people will congratulate you, and by congratulating you, they will express their recognition. There is a kind of a third scenario, a kind of a halfway house between these two scenarios, which I would call so-called coordinated independence. This is the scenario where prior to declaring independence, you actually try to establish alliances, you try to find friends who will recognize you within the first 24 or 48 hours to help you to stabilize your new state. This was the case, for example, in Kosovo, where Kosovo had been in negotiations with the United States, with Germany, with France, with the United Kingdom, where these states, together with Kosovo, agreed what would be the best time for making a unilateral declaration of independence. And I can tell you from experience that in the case of Kosovo, the declaration of independence had to be postponed several times because one time the Americans didn't like the date, then the Germans were unhappy with the date. So at the end, when everybody gave their green light, then the National Assembly in Kosovo came together and declared independence on the 17th of February 2008. Now, this kind of coordinated unilateral declaration of independence is helpful because you show to the parent state right from the beginning that you have powerful friends that are prepared to back you. Now, this again might prevent the parent state from making any mistakes of, for example, sending in the troops again to basically quell the uprising or to put down a unilateral declaration of independence. Now, such a coordinated independence is something that requires a lot of work before you actually declare independence. I would say, if you toy with the idea of coordinated independence, you better start right now after leaving this lecture hall, and you start working on finding friends and explaining your position to them, so that when the time is right, you have a big friend like the United States, or in Europe, Germany, France, or the United Kingdom, who will say, yes, we recognize Catalonia as an independent state. Now, what does recognition actually mean? You know, this is a technical legal term that is often misunderstood by the general public. Recognition is used in many different meanings. You can use the term recognition as a shortcut for expressing just political support, an acknowledgement of political aspirations. About 130 states recognize the state of Palestine. But as you all know, there is no state of Palestine. Palestine does not fulfill the requirements of statehood in international law, and still 130 states have declared that they recognize Palestine. Now, in this context, all recognition really says is, we approve of your cause, we want to support you on your way to achieve independence. You have a legitimate claim to have your own independent state. On the other hand, in a more technical sense, recognition is something that acknowledges a legal status, that acknowledges on the part of the recognizing state that you fulfill the legal criteria of statehood, and that therefore you can function as a state in international law, in international relations. Now, for Catalonia, I would say what is required at the end of the day is the second one. You want to be recognized as a state in law, that you fulfill the legal requirements of statehood, and that this is documented to the outside world. Now, here we come again to an interesting distinction. We can recognize a state, so we recognize something as a state, or we recognize an existing state. This is normally expressed by the two different formulations of recognition of a state and recognition as a state. So the little word of or as makes the difference in international law. Now, what Catalonia really needs first is recognition as a state. This is the legal recognition that says, we acknowledge that you fulfill the legal requirements of statehood in international law. Now, what are these legal requirements of statehood in international law? They are a people or a population in a defined territory with an effective government. Now, in the case of Catalonia, everybody knows where the borders of Catalonia are. Roughly, I would expect. There is a little bit of Catalonia in France, but we don't talk about this at the moment. So all of you probably know who is Catalan, I assume, so you probably feel as a Catalan nation, so we have a Catalan population. The question that might be a little bit more difficult at the time is, do we have an effective Catalan government? Now, an effective government means a government that is able to exercise control over the people and the territory of Catalonia. Now, this will all depend on the circumstances. If, of course, on the day you declare independence, everything is calm, then probably the world will say, yes, the new government exercises effective control. The moment Spanish policemen actually move into Catalonia and arrest certain public officials in Catalonia, at that moment the world would say, the new Catalan government is not able to exercise effective control. So it will depend on the situation at the time. It will depend on the reaction of Spain. And we have heard in the media that some Spanish military has said, we will move into Catalonia and put things right. If they follow up on these threats, of course, that would, of course, make it difficult for the world to say that there is an effective government. But assume everything is calm. You have had your declaration of independence, and of course, this is something you can think about already. You know, I was wandering the streets of Barcelona, and I said this morning, I was basically acting as a location scout. I was wandering around, and I thought, where would I declare independence of Catalonia, you know?
We have the place.
You have the place?
Yes.
Okay, where is the place?
In La Plaça Sant Jaume, in the center of the city, and we have a balcony.
Oh, you have a balcony, exactly.
We have a balcony.
We have a balcony. Because I think the basic requirement I identified this morning is we need a balcony. Yeah. Because we need a balcony speech where someone stands and at the end says, and hereby I declare the independent state of Catalonia. It's a little bit like, and you have experience with that already, I declare the Olympic Games opened. You know, so you have had that in Barcelona, so you have to basically imitate that. So imagine we have the unilateral declaration of independence, and of course Spain will stay calm. At that moment, the international community will probably come to the conclusion that you fulfill the 3 requirements of statehood so that you can be recognized as a state. But that does not necessarily mean that you will actually be recognized as a state, so that the recognition of a state really happens. Because the recognition of a state is a political decision at the end of the day. There are a couple of criteria, but these are more political criteria. In 1991, the European Union put down certain guidelines for the recognition of new states in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. These were criteria like that you had to honor human rights, you should not possess weapons of mass destruction, that you should adopt the rule of law. But these are all political criteria that determine whether at the end of the day I recognize the existing state. So this recognition of a state requires that there is a state in the first instance, that the requirements for statehood are met. Now, this is where recognition really becomes a difficult topic, because there are no uniform criteria. Every country can come up with its own criteria for recognizing existing states. And people tell me here, but we are a peace-loving, democratic society where the rule of law reigns and we're all nice people. And I can attest, it's at least the few Catalans I've met, they are nice people. So I would recognize them. But of course, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you are a dictatorship or a democracy. At the end of the day, there are other political reasons that might influence other states in their decision to recognize or not to recognize. Now, this morning I gave an example. You all know that in 2008 Kosovo declared independence. Kosovo is a Muslim country, and one of its backers financially was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had great interest in Kosovo, was paying millions of US dollars in financial assistance, and still Saudi Arabia did not recognize Kosovo for many years. Now, the reason for that is, you might know or not, Iran. Now, you might wonder, what does Iran have to do with the question whether Saudi Arabia recognizes Kosovo as a new state or not? The answer is as follows. Saudi Arabia doesn't like Iran. There is a conflict between these two states in the Middle East. This is partly motivated by a different religious understanding of Islam, but partly it's power politics. Now, Saudi Arabia wanted Russia to support resolutions against Iran in the United Nations Security Council. Russia was one of the major backers of Serbia, which of course is opposed to the independence of Kosovo. So at the end of the day, Saudi Arabia did not recognize Kosovo to please Russia to get a resolution against Iran. So you see, it had nothing to do with Kosovo. So even if you are the nicest people on earth, and people really like you and would like to recognize you, they might not do so because they have other political, financial, or economic interests that tell them not to recognize an independent Catalonia. So this is to be borne in mind, and I have this feeling when I talk to people here that you think because we are democratic, because this is a transparent and open process, because we have had a referendum, people will have to recognize us. Some will, others won't, and it will depend on many different factors. And some of these factors have nothing to do with you, and some of these factors you can't even influence. Because some countries might acknowledge that you are a state, they might even want to trade with you, but they do not want to say, we recognize you as a new state, because they have their own, perhaps, little problem at home. Now, this is, for example, the case with countries like China. China has a lot of independence movements in the north of the country, and they don't want to encourage these independence movements by recognizing independence movements in other countries. And so at the end, that might motivate a country like China not to recognize Catalonia. Now, at the end of the day, and Bardo Fassbender will say more about this later on, recognition is a unilateral act. It is not an act that comes from an institution like the European Union or the United Nations. Neither the European Union nor the United Nations are in the business of recognizing new states. On the contrary, membership of these organizations normally depends on recognition by individual states. For example, membership of the United Nations requires a 2/3 majority in the UN General Assembly. Now, this is 129 states. Now, states that normally do not recognize a new state will not vote for admission of this new entity to the United Nations. So you would need some 129 recognitions to actually be admitted to the United Nations, including, and this is the bigger hurdle at the end of the day, including the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So you might have on your side the United States, the United Kingdom, perhaps France, but I think this might already be uncertain. But you might not have on your side China and Russia, and that already creates a problem. Because if you don't have those votes, because these countries do not recognize you, then membership of the organization is closed to you. Similarly, if we talk about the European Union, there again, it is a unanimous vote. You require all 27 member states, all 28 member states, to recognize you to become a member of the European Union. Now, just to conclude, recognition at the end of the day is important for new countries for various reasons. First of all, because, as I said before, it gives stability. It creates, in a sense, legitimacy from outside, because you are accepted by the international community or other members of the international community. But it also is the requirement for the new state to integrate into the international society, to be a part of the international community, to take part in international cooperation, to become a member of international organizations, but also to join bilateral and multilateral treaties. Now, just because I like this example, I wanted to ask you, who loves football in this auditorium? Football, soccer?
Nobody.
Okay. All right. Everybody, I saw that when I arrived. There was football on TV, and everybody basically was standing there in the restaurant watching football. So Catalans love football. Now, one consequence of non-recognition of a new state of Catalonia at the end might be that Barcelona could never again play Champions League. Can you imagine that? Because for Barcelona to play in the Champions League, the Catalan Football Association, as it then would have to be a member of the European Football Association. But of course, you can only become a member of the European Football Association if you are a member of the United Nations. And as I told you, to be a member of the United Nations, you need at least 129 states to recognize you, including the 5 permanent members. I know this is a horrible thought, so we all will have to work for a way for Catalonia to become independent and Barcelona still playing the Champions League and hopefully continuing to lose against Bayern Munich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Talmon. Summarizing, we need friends, isn't it?
We need friends.
We need friends. So, Dr. Fassbender, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. I also would like first to thank the organizers of this conference for having me here. It has been a perfect organization so far. I'm very glad to talk to you. My subject is going to be the relationship of an independent Catalonia with the European Union. So the emphasis of my short remarks will be the law of the European Union. I actually believe that the question of the place of Catalonia in the European Union is of much more importance than the question of bilateral recognition today, because whatever decision will be made, it will be made in the framework of the European Union. As long as it exists at all, it will try to find a common decision and to find a common position on this, because not to agree on a question like this would really mean a disaster to all efforts of a common European foreign policy. In the eyes of the wider world, disagreement in this point, the future of territory belonging so far to the European Union and a country in the heart of Europe, if you cannot agree on this in the European Union, then people in the United States or wherever will ask on what can you actually agree. So one will make every effort at Brussels to find a kind of common position, and if this position is there, then it's no longer a question of bilateral recognition. In a technical sense it still may be, but then there is a common ground found by the member states of the European Union, and as difficult it is to predict the future, you all know this, I'm fairly optimistic personally, and I think the European Union will find some solution. It must, because simply its own values dictate the finding of such a solution. It would be a tremendous negative event for the Union to be divided on an issue like that, and one will really make every effort. Much more is at stake than the question of Catalonia and its place. It's really a question of the future of the European Union in such terms. Now, everybody, I think, all major political forces in Catalonia support a continued membership in the European Union, with which the region is economically very closely interwoven. The Sovereignty Declaration of the Catalonian Parliament explicitly stresses its commitment to the European Union and its fundamental values. However, opponents of an independence have lately scored with a strong argument saying that, or warning that an independent Catalonia, they used the same argument for Scotland, would automatically, they say, drop out of the European Union. And then they say it will not be easy to be readmitted because this needs a unanimous decision in the Council of the European Union. It needs ratification of an accession treaty by all present member states of the Union. And so they say Spain will never accept that. So therefore, a continued membership in the European Union is a sort of illusion. They refer in part to statements adopted by the European Commission. Most recently, in December 2012, President José Manuel Barroso stated in a letter addressed to the House of Lords, I quote, "The EU is founded on the treaties which apply only to the member states who have agreed and ratified them. If part of the territory of a member state would cease to be part of that state because it were to become a new independent state, the treaties would no longer apply to their territory. In other words, I'm still quoting, a new independent state would become a third country with respect to the EU, and the treaties would no longer apply on its territory." End of that quote. Many of these words are taken from earlier statements. The first one, I think, was by Commission President Prodi a couple of years ago. There has also been some support for this view from the jurisprudential side, from colleagues of mine. I only mention Professor Weiler, Joseph Weiler of New York University School of Law, and now also president of the European University Institute, who condemned, one must say, the Catalonian aspiration for independence as, he said, a form of irredentist Euro-tribalism which contradicts the deep values and needs of the European Union. Now, I think these threats aiming at the Catalonian and also the Scottish public that an independent Catalonia or Scotland respectively must live outside the EU is not legally justified. I believe the question must be answered on the basis of the law of the European Union as it stands today. First, I think it is correct that Catalonia would not automatically remain in the European Union once it separates from Spain. There is no rule to that effect either in the international law on state succession to international treaties or in the law of the European Union itself. Regardless of the statehood Catalonia enjoyed in the past, after a newly won independence, the country would be a new state in the international legal order without contractual relationship to the European Union. That is true, notwithstanding the current EU citizenship of the Catalans and also the Scots, as this citizenship is dependent, or as one says, contingent on the nationality of Spain and the United Kingdom as member states of the European Union. Secondly, despite losing a part of its territory and population, Spain would continue to be a member of the Union. But President Barroso's view that after independence Catalonia would have to apply for EU membership just like any other third country, I think, is wrong. The rules on accession, as to be found in Article 49 of the EU Treaty, were drafted with regard to real third countries, that is, states which in the past were not part of the European Union. all the enlargement of the European community since the first enlargement in 1973, all these changes in the membership of the EU only occurred this way, namely by real third states who had been outside of the framework of the Union, complementing the former circle of member states. When in 1992 the member states of the then European communities agreed on the predecessor of the present Article 49, this was an Article O in the Treaty of Maastricht, they did not consider the possibility of an application for membership submitted by a country which had come into existence through secession from a member state. The purpose of this article was a different one. It was an effort to unify the conditions of membership in the three then existing European communities, the economic community, coal and steel, and the atomic community, and that of the Union. So there was a common article created, replacing the other articles in the founding treaties on the three European communities. A second purpose of that new article was to invite, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the newly free countries of Central and Eastern Europe to apply for membership in the Union. So the article must in fact be read in the light of the preamble of the Maastricht Treaty, in which the contracting state parties recalled, I quote, the historic importance of the ending of the division of the European continent and the need to create firm basis for the construction of the future Europe. Nobody imagined in 1992 or later or before the possibility that new independent states emerge within the European community or the Union respectively. If you look at the literature, the leading commentaries on the EU treaty and the treatises written in the various languages, you do not find a single reference to that scenario at all. It's not even mentioned because nobody thought of that. So this is, I think, an important point. In the absence of any particular provisions of the treaties dealing with the question of EU membership of a country, the territory of which was a part of the Union before independence, Article 49 of the EU treaty can only be applied by analogy to the case of Catalonia or Scotland, respectively. This application by analogy must take into account the particular circumstances of these cases, distinguishing them from the normal situation envisaged by Article 49. Now, 49 first sets forth substantive criteria to be met by a candidate for membership. I quote, any European state which respects the values referred to in Article 2 and is committed to promoting them may apply to become a member of the Union. End of this quote. The values specified in Article 2 as values on which the EU is founded are respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These substantive criteria can and must also be applied to the case of an application for membership by a newly independent country, the territory of which belonged to the EU before the country's independence. This is simply because the EU wants to be a community of states subscribing to the same values. That's the ambition of the European Union. So any state wishing to belong to the Union must meet those substantive criteria. While there is no good reason, therefore, for deviating from these criteria of the EU treaty, in the case of a country, the territory of which belonged to the EU before independence, the legal situation, I think, is different with respect to the procedure provided for in Article 49 of the EU treaty. That procedure is characterized by two fundamental requirements: a unanimous decision taken by the Council and a ratification of the agreement on accession by all EU member states. Each of these two requirements would enable the country from which the applicant state seceded to obstruct an accession, even if the substantial criteria are all met by an applicant and all the other member states do admit this. However, such an obstruction would amount to an abuse of law if the underlying motive was to punish the respective population for its decision in favor of an independent status. EU law does not provide a judicial basis for such a sanction simply because it does not prohibit secession. The law of the European Union is silent on the issue of a separation of a particular region from a member state in the same way as it says nothing about a merger of two member states. According to the EU treaty, it is true, the Union, I quote, shall respect the essential state functions of its member states, including ensuring the territorial integrity of the state. Further, the EU's external policy is pursuing the objective, among others, to safeguard the integrity of the Union against foreign states. But the Union does not defend the existing borders of its member states within the European Union. In other words, the EU was not founded to petrify the borders between its member states as they presently exist. The EU rather provides a legal frame in which peaceful change can occur, even relating to questions of self-determination and territory. If a people strives for self-determination, this certainly does not contradict the values of the Union as a community committed to the rules and principles of international law. Many articles of the EU treaty refer to that, and among those rules and principles of international law has the right of peoples to self-determination a prominent place. Furthermore, as already stated, EU citizenship, which was established by the Treaty of Maastricht of 1992, must be taken into account. Citizens of the Union have, among other things, the right to move and reside freely within the territory of all EU member states, the right to vote and to stand as candidates in elections to the European Parliament and in municipal elections in their member states of residence, and under certain conditions the right to enjoy in a third country diplomatic and consular protection by the authorities of a member state other than their own. EU citizenship, further, the long-standing individual rights concerning the free movement of workers, services and establishment, and the rights guaranteed by the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union also speak against a member state's unilateral right to obstruct an accession as a form of punishment. Because the EU constitutes, as the European Court of Justice already emphasized in a judgment of 1963, the famous case of Van Gent and Loos, I quote, a new legal order of international law, the subjects of which comprise not only member states but also their nationals. Independently of the legislation of member states, the court went on to say, community law therefore not only imposes obligations on individuals, but is also intended to confer upon them rights which become part of their legal heritage. Proud words, of course, spoken in a different context, but I think not withdrawn by the European Court until today. Thus, the law of the Union is geared towards maintaining the rights of individuals under EU law who at some point of time have become subjects of the EU legal order. To summarize, and this is the last paragraph of my remarks, An independent Catalonia or Scotland would not automatically become a member of the EU, but would have to apply for membership. However, participating in the decision-making process of the Council of the EU, and when invited to ratify an agreement on accession, Spain and Great Britain respectively would be required to act in good faith. Their rejection of a membership application alone could not hinder accession. They would act against the spirit of the EU treaty if they denied the population of their former region the benefits of EU membership, including EU citizenship, in order to punish them for their striving for independence as a form of self-determination. In the preamble of the EU treaty, the contracting states have resolved, I quote, to continue the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. An exclusion of a people who opted for independence in a democratic procedure as a form of sanction is incompatible with that process. When in the preamble of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, member states are calling upon the other peoples of Europe who share their ideal to join in their efforts, that call is also and particularly addressed to such a people wishing to retain its allegiance to the European Union. Thank you very much.